We all hope that the Ukrainian people prevail in the Russian war on their country, but what is the likely legacy of that war going to be? Well, today I'm speaking to two of the authors of a paper that examines the likely impact of the war in Ukraine, and also an economist who will soon be experiencing that legacy at first hand. Felipe, hello.
Hi Tim, nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too, and welcome Anna, it's the first time we've spoken.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks for having us.
Well, Anna, first of all to you, in this paper, you're using historical precedents to examine the consequences of war. I would have thought wars were all extremely different. Does your research say that these legacies of war are consistent, they're predictable?
Yes. So initially, economists tended to focus on the effects of bombing on economic activity, but the field have expanded a lot to include not only bombing, but different types of victimization, such as, for instance, civilian repression, and to not only look at economic activity, but also to political and cultural effects. So, meaning that this research has broadened enormously our understanding of the effects of wars in all its complexity. So yes, wars are unique, each one of them, but this research has allowed us to identify consistent and predictable patterns.
Felipe, the pattern that is perhaps most salient, we see it on the news every night from Ukraine, the bombing campaigns. Historically, what have the effects of this large-scale destruction of infrastructure and, of course, people been in the short term and the long term?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Tim. And as Anna was saying, I think there has been a shift in the literature. The canonical cases would have been Germany, Japan, and even Vietnam. And in those cases, it's mostly about post-war recovery. And we can say also that most of it would be short-term physical capital destruction. But as Anna was mentioning, there's a new literature that it's re-examining these old questions and coming up with new answers. So we have a joint work with Juan Felipe Riaño on Laos, just to give you an example. And there we find that bombing can have negative long-term consequences. And I would just stress two channels briefly. One would be UXO, so unexploded ordnance contamination. So the war ends, but you still have bombs in the field, and obviously that's going to affect the civilian population, especially children, and also how that interplays with structural transformation. So you get lower human capital accumulation, and that in a way ties you to being in the agricultural as opposed to the manufacturing or the service sector.
Yes, we spoke about Laos before, I remember, and Felipe, this is one thing that's clearly going to be a challenge to Ukraine at the moment when you see that the campaign is specifically targeting important infrastructure there.
Yeah, so maybe the policy lesson that emerges from that is the importance of demining. Like we barely hear about anything of bombs from World War II in Germany, for instance, except very rarely, whereas this is a day-to-day phenomenon for post-war countries, for instance, Laos, and hopefully not Ukraine. So I think that the demining agenda should take center stage.
Anna, there are a lot of things in this paper. We don't have time to discuss all of them, but one very interesting part of that is you're looking at the impact of war on the social fabric. So Ukraine, for example, can repair its infrastructure and its buildings, but there is then a social legacy. Can that be rebuilt?
Actually, some studies find that wars can have a positive effect on cooperation and social fabric, while other studies find the opposite. So most likely what might be happening is that conflict fosters cooperation, social capital, towards the in-group members, but not towards the outsiders who represent a threat. Right, so but you cannot always tell an ally from an enemy, and this might be particularly the case in civil wars or when violence and repression relies on anonymous informants, for instance, as we find with Felipe in our paper on the Spanish Civil War. So And the last thing that I would like to mention is the role of post-war institutions like truth and reconciliation commissions can have on rebuilding the social fabric.
Felipe, there's also the problem of the forced displacement of people. Again, it's something that we have covered in other contexts, and I seem to remember that the news about that is bad on both sides. The people who are forced to migrate, this is obviously clearly negative for them, but also it means that the where they migrate from, some of the most talented people who can migrate leave, and so it's a challenge for the places from where they have migrated. Is this inevitably a double negative?
I mean, it's a big topic, especially important now in the current context. There's an estimate that 7.6 million Ukrainian refugees are now only in the EU, and the reports talk about 6.2 million internally displaced people. So this is a massive phenomenon, and in my view, probably the most important current legacy of this war. It's complex. So I would say in terms of refugee selection, on arrival, and especially females, have lower employment outcomes than economic migrants, and that's a consensus in the literature. The impact on forced migrants, as you were just pointing out, is usually negative, so they fare worse than the native population. Maybe the one glimmer of hope is that forced migration can shift migrants to prefer human capital over physical capital investments, as we were just discussing with bombing. And the impact on receiving regions is a bit of a net. I think that there is no strong consensus in the academic literature. However, how refugees are integrated at the receiving end of the spectrum matters. So are they going to more industrialized regions, more urban regions? Are there labor programs, training programs, et cetera, et cetera? So there's an area where policy can really help.
Well, there is a lot more in this paper. As you said, Anna, the study of the legacies of war seems to be very, very broad, very interesting, very rich now. So I encourage everyone to download and read the paper. We'll give a link to it at the end. But thank you both for talking to me today.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
Roman, I wanted to ask you about this paper for a special reason. You're currently in the US, but soon you're going back to Ukraine, aren't you? Tell us why that is.
Yeah, that's correct. So I've took a leave of absence from Case Western University, and now I'm going to be moving to Ukraine to open up American University Kyiv. But for the obvious reasons, it has been delayed for some time, but I am planning to move to Ukraine.
Yes, isn't it better, considering the amount of disruption that the Russian war on Ukraine is causing and is detailed by Felipe and Anna in their paper, wouldn't it be better to just delay that until after the war is over?
So the answer is most likely no, because Ukraine needs rebuilding right now, and also training of the human capital that will be used in the rebuilding process. It needs to be done now, especially when we talk about project managers, when we talk about the IT and engineer specialists that will be fluent in English. And that's, again, American University Kyiv is completely in English. It's in sort of an American institution in Ukraine. So when the process of rebuilding starts, we need to have these people ready to dive in and start working on amazing projects that will come along to rebuild Ukraine, to invest in Ukraine. And the groundwork has to be done prior to that. That's why the importance to doing it now rather than waiting until the war is over. And we don't know when it's going to actually end. So yes, we need to do it now.
We've recently seen on the news absolutely devastating footage of how the Russian army is targeting Ukraine's infrastructure. And this is something that in their paper Felipe and Anna go into in some detail, but they suggest that the rebuilding of infrastructure happens perhaps quicker than we imagine. Are you confident that this infrastructure can be rebuilt in a timely way?
Yeah, so as we even speak right now, today, Russia again heavily bombed Ukraine, and there is no electricity whatsoever in the city of Lviv, which is right neighboring with Poland. Ivano-Frankivsk, Khmelnytsky, those are the western city, and Kiev as well. Even today, mayor of Ukraine, of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, I know him very well personally. He said that it might be necessary for people to evacuate parts of the Kiev because of just inability to provide water and electricity because of these bombings. So let me say this. Ukrainian electrical system is quite inefficient. And part of that is because it's run by monopoly, a company called DTEK. And it's one of the reasons why Russians are so successful against Ukrainian infrastructure. If it was more decentralized, if there was thousands of little electric stations and grids that provide electricity, if everybody had their own electric batteries on the top of their roofs, like it is in Germany and Bavaria, then it would be a very different story. Russia would not be able to target, so easily the critical infrastructure and electricity. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why Ukrainian army is so successful, because of this decentralization. But this reform obviously happened on many levels in Ukraine, but it didn't reach the energy sector. So one of the hopes is that as we rebuild this energy sector in Ukraine, that we will be able to be more decentralized. They will be able to build better and faster. So I do believe that it is possible. And the more important is that we will need to do it in a different way than we have done it in the past, which could actually long-term benefit Ukraine, create a more competitive market. But right now, Ukrainians are suffering, severely suffering. And this is one of those aids that needs to come right now. We cannot wait until the war is over. We need to do it right now because that's the livelihood of people.
Well, let's talk about the people that are going to be involved in this. To build an institution like this, you need trust, open exchange of ideas. You need people, you need talented academics, and many of them will have left. How long before you can do this?
So this is a good question, and it's a difficult question for me. And that's a question that is also addressed in the paper, where, when the war happens, when the conflict happens, a significant part of the human capital runs out of the country, immigrates, reallocates, dislocates. And so there is a question of, the brain drain that comes from the country. And usually it's the people who have a better financial means, who are more educated, who are better suited, who know the language, right? English or German or French, that usually are the first one to immigrate and leave the country. And so the fear is that these people may not come back, or at least not fully come back. And these are usually the better educated, the more motivated people to start with. And so I do think that it's not going to be such a big problem. Maybe it is somewhat overestimated in the literature. Ukraine is a special case, and hear me why. Because first of all, I've personally witnessed people who have immigrated, and already right now they're saying, look, we want to come back. As soon as this is over, there is some sort of safety, normalcy, we're coming back. We want to be a part of rebuilding Ukraine. This is not just a civil war, right? This is not some sort of, side conflict that happened. This is the survival of the nation. Think of Israel, right? When Israel got its statehood, all the Israelites from around the world started pouring resources and people into Israel. And Israel quickly became one of the most successful countries in the world. So I think that's the story that will be in Ukraine. people will want to go back, like me, who is originally a Ukrainian born, but also an American now. But I want to go back and be part of this. And I can imagine that there will be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of stories like this that, will enable Ukraine to recover its human capital much sooner than probably traditional conflicts would predict. So that's why I'm more optimistic on this one.
Well, Roman, we wish you every success in your endeavour. Come back and talk to us about it when the university is up and running.
Thank you, Tim. And I would like to invite everyone who is listening, who wants to participate in this great effort to rebuild Ukraine. Please join us. Join us if you are a faculty, if you're a professor. You can come and give lectures, online lectures, or once we are up and running and there is safety, you can come to Kyiv. We have one of the most beautiful campuses that I've ever seen in my life. It's right on the river Dnieper. Or if you want to collaborate with our scientists, please get in touch with me. I would love to talk to you. And thank you so much for your support, Tim. Thank you so much for the paper that has been written and will be widely distributed. And thank you for your organization, what you do.
The paper is called Likely Legacies of War for Post-Conflict Ukraine. Many authors, as you can see. We haven't had time to discuss most of what's in this paper, so the best thing you can do is to download it and read it for yourselves. Use the link that's on screen now. You can also use this link to access our recording of the panel discussion of this paper from the 76th Annual Economic Policy Panel Meeting.